The security guard's fist slammed into my ribs. No warning, no mercy. I barely dodged the second strike, my back hitting the cold server rack as he lunged for the ledger in my grip. Harrison's voice echoed in my head. The loser gets sold. My fingers tightened around the file marked liability clause. Proof this wasn't just inheritance, but a trap. The guard's badge glinted under the emergency lights. And then I saw it. The federal insignia. Too late. The study smelled of stale cloves and the metallic tang of the oxygen concentrator humming in the corner. Michael Sterling's fingers brushed the leather binding of the legacy ledger, its surface cold and unforgiving against his palm. He pulled the heavy volume from his father's mahogany desk, the spine groaning under the weight of a century of Sterling secrets. A single sheet of vellum slid from the pages, landing on the Persian rug with a soft thud. Michael snatched it up. Instead of a standard balance sheet, a chaotic web of geometric lines pulsed under a translucent screen embedded in paper. At the center, a digital ticker flickered in a pale, sickly amber. Social utility coefficient, 14.2. The number pulsed like a failing heart. Michael tapped the glass, his pulse drumming against his fingertips. Below the score, a list of red-inked infractions scrolled past. Missed charity galas, a public spat with a union rep, 3 nights spent in a Soho jazz club instead of the boardroom. Each transgression shaved points off his inheritance like a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble. Is it true? A voice rasped from the shadows. Michael flinched, spinning to find his father's aide, Elias, leaning against the doorframe. The old man adjusted his spectacles, his eyes tracking the amber glow in Michael's hand. The algorithm doesn't lie, Michael, Elias said, his voice a dry rustle. Your father built this cage. He didn't think you'd survive the lock. Michael gripped the ledger until his knuckles turned white. The amber light cast long, jagged shadows across the room, turning the Sterling legacy into a graveyard of missed opportunities. He wasn't an heir. He was a liability. The heavy silence of the study was broken only by the rhythmic click-click of the analog stopwatch Michael kept around his neck. He pressed the button with a steady thumb, timing the duration of his own shock. 14 seconds. He needed to be faster. He needed to be more efficient. His father, Harrison, lay in a hospital bed 3 miles away, a titan felled by a stroke, yet his presence in this room was suffocating. The ledger was Harrison's final masterpiece, a digital judge, jury, and executioner. Michael looked at the screen again. His score of 14.2 was a death sentence in the Sterling world. He scrolled through the rankings, his eyes stinging. There at the very top was Sarah. His sister's score sat at a radiant 88.9. The gap wasn't just a distance, it was a canyon. Sarah had always been the perfect daughter, the one who never missed a gala, the one who signed every verbal agreement with her silver Judas pen. She was winning the game Michael hadn't even realized they were playing. The realization that his entire life had been a calculated lie hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't a son. He was a data point. Every childhood birthday, every graduation, every failed relationship had been fed into this machine, weighed against his sister's performance, and found wanting. The oxygen concentrator in the corner gave a wet, wheezing hiss, mimicking the sound of his father's laughter. Michael felt a sudden, desperate urge to tear the screen out of the vellum, to shatter the glass and bleed the amber light dry. But he knew that wouldn't help. The ledger was networked. It was everywhere. He moved to the mahogany desk, his movements sharp and metronomic. He needed to see the raw data. He needed to know why he was failing. He pulled a portable hacking rig from his satchel, a sleek, black box that looked like a weapon in the refined atmosphere of the library. He connected it to the ledger's port, the cable snapping into place with a satisfying click. "Michael, what are you doing?" He didn't look up. He knew that voice. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. She smelled of expensive gardenia, a scent so thick it felt like it was coating Michael's tongue. "The system is rigged, Sarah," Michael said, his voice flat. He clicked his stopwatch. "You've been in here for 6 seconds. State your purpose." Sarah laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She walked into the room, her eyes unblinking, tracking the movement of the data on the screen. She clutched a leather binder to her chest, the one where she kept her spreadsheet of apologies. "I'm not here to argue, Michael. I'm here to witness. The ledger is simply reflecting reality. You've always been the social liability. I'm just the one who followed the rules. Rules you helped write?" Michael countered. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was bypassing the first layer of the ledger's defenses. The air in the room grew warm, the scent of scorched dust rising from the cooling fans of his rig. He saw it then, the hidden entries. There were spikes in his negative data that didn't correlate with any real-world events. Someone was feeding the system false information, a moral turpitude flag from a night he had spent working at the office, a financial negligence mark for a charity donation that had never been processed. On the other side of the screen, Sarah's score remained unnaturally stable, a flat line of perfection that defied human nature. "You're cheating," Michael whispered. "I'm optimizing," Sarah corrected, her nails tapping a rhythmic beat against her binder. Tap, tap, tap. There's a difference. The room suddenly felt smaller. The shadows cast by the amber light seemed to stretch toward Michael, reaching for his throat. He was deep into the mansion's internal network now, the data flowing past his eyes in a blur of red and gold. He was looking for the source of the false entries, the ghost in the machine that was trying to bury him. Suddenly, the heavy oak door of the study slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Michael spun around, his hand flying to his stopwatch. From the corner of the room, behind a tall stack of first-edition biographies, a man stepped out. It was Miller, the head of the estate's security. He was a burly man, his uniform straining against his shoulders, his eyes fixed on the black box Michael had connected to the ledger. Miller didn't look like a guard anymore. He looked like a predator. "Mr. Sterling said no one was to touch the books," Miller growled. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Michael's chest. "Miller, get out," Michael ordered, trying to maintain the authority of his name. "This is family business." "Not anymore," Miller said. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the Persian rug. "The executor wants the data. He wants to make sure the competitive integrity of the inheritance is maintained." Miller lunged. The attack was sudden and violent. Michael barely had time to move before the guard's weight slammed into him, pinning him against the mahogany desk. The hacking rig skittered across the wood, its lights flickering. Michael felt the cold metal of the desk edge bite into his back. He struggled, his fingers clawing at Miller's thick forearms. But the man was like a wall of stone. "Give me the drive," Miller hissed, his breath smelling of stale coffee and tobacco. Michael reached out blindly, his hand closing around a heavy brass bookend, a bust of some long-dead philosopher. He swung it with every ounce of strength he had left. The metal connected with the side of Miller's head with a sickening thud. The guard groaned, his grip loosening. Michael shoved him back, sending him stumbling into a row of bookshelves. A dozen leather-bound volumes tumbled down, burying the man in a shower of paper and dust. Michael didn't wait to see if he would get up. He grabbed his hacking rig and a high-security hardware drive that had fallen from Miller's vest during the struggle. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, irregular beat that no stopwatch could measure. He looked at Sarah. She was standing by the window, her face a mask of cold calculation. She hadn't moved to help him, nor had she moved to help Miller. She was just watching. This is what it's come to? Michael gasped, clutching the drive to his chest. We're killing each other for a number. It's not just a number, Michael, Sarah said, her voice a soft, terrifying whisper. It's the only thing that's real. Michael turned and fled the room, his boots thudding against the marble floors of the hallway. He needed a place to hide, a place to see what was on Miller's drive. He ducked into the estate library, a vast, echoing space filled with the smell of old paper and the silence of a tomb. He crawled behind a heavy oak reading table, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He connected Miller's drive to his rig. His fingers were shaking as he typed the bypass codes. He was looking for a file titled Liability Clause. He had seen the name mentioned in the ledger's metadata, a hidden footnote in the inheritance contract. The file opened. Subverted Beat 1.4. Michael's eyes scanned the text, his mind already translating the legalese into data. He had spent years as a systems architect, building structures that were meant to last, meant to be secure. He expected the liability clause to be a standard non-disclosure agreement, perhaps a final hurdle to ensure he wouldn't speak to the press about his father's eccentricities. He thought if he could just understand the terms, he could find a way to win. He could prove to his father, even now, that he was the smarter, more efficient choice. He felt a surge of hope, a belief that his technical skill would finally be his salvation. The document seemed to confirm his suspicions at first. It detailed a transfer of assets, a transition of power from Harrison to his chosen successor. Michael saw his own name mentioned in a draft section, and for a fleeting second, his shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed. He saw a clause about total control of the Sterling portfolio and immunity from past corporate decisions. He had won. The false entries were just a test, a final stress test of his resolve. He leaned back against the oak table, a small, triumphant smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He had outplayed them all, but then he noticed a discrepancy. A small red-inked footnote at the bottom of page 42. It was a link to a secondary database, one he didn't recognize. He frowned, his unease returning like a cold prickle across his skin. He clicked the link. The screen flashed a deep, bloody red. The truth hit Michael like a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air in the silent library. The Sterling firm wasn't a fortune. It was a hollowed-out shell. For the last decade, Harrison had been running a massive, multi-billion-dollar fraud, funneling money through offshore accounts to cover up a string of catastrophic losses. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a legal anchor. According to the liability clause, the heir with the highest social utility score wouldn't just inherit the assets. They would inherit the legal responsibility for the fraud. By maintaining a high score, the heir was essentially authenticating their competence and their deep involvement in the firm's operations. The federal government was already circling, their investigators just waiting for a signature on the final transfer papers. Michael looked at the screen, his world tilting. He wasn't fighting for a fortune. He was fighting to be the one who didn't go to prison for the rest of his life. The winner would be the public face of the collapse, the one the feds would haul away in handcuffs while the loser walked away with nothing, including the debt. His father hadn't built a cage for Michael. He had built a sacrificial altar. And Sarah, with her 88.9 score, was standing right at the edge of the blade, completely unaware that her perfection was her own death warrant. Or was she? Michael thought of her Judas pen, her obsession with leverage. Had she known? No. The look on her face in the study hadn't been one of hidden knowledge. It had been pure, unadulterated greed. Michael gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He was in a worse position than he had been 10 minutes ago. If he tried to lower his score now, the system would flag it as intentional sabotage, a felony in the eyes of the ledger. If he tried to warn Sarah, she would think it was just another move in the game. He was trapped in a system where the only way to win was to lose. But the system wouldn't let him lose without destroying him first. The clock on the library wall ticked, a slow, heavy sound that seemed to mock the rapid click-click of the stopwatch around his neck. He had 72 hours until the final tally. 72 hours to find a way to break a system that was designed to consume him. He needed to move. He needed to get out of the mansion. Michael gathered his gear, his movements frantic now. He headed for the basement server room, the heart of the house's smart grid. If he couldn't change the ledger's rules, he would change the data it was fed. He would sabotage Sarah's score, not out of malice, but to save her and himself from the trap their father had set. The basement was a labyrinth of humming racks and flickering blue lights. The air was cold, smelling of ozone and chilled metal. Michael found the main terminal, his fingers dancing across the keys. He began to manipulate the power consumption logs, diverting massive amounts of energy to a series of offshore accounts he had discovered in the fraud files. He would make it look like Sarah was laundering money through the house itself. It was a risky move. The ledger's active monitoring system was like a hawk, watching for any deviation from the norm. Every time Michael bypassed a security gate, the lights in the basement flickered, a physical manifestation of the system's growing suspicion. "Michael, is that you?" The voice came over the estate's intercom system, but it wasn't Sarah's voice. It was a recording. "You're a failure, Michael. Just like your grandfather. You can't even manage a simple schedule. Why should I trust you with a company?" It was Harrison. A recording from Michael's 10th birthday, the day his father had lost track of time and left him waiting at the gates of his boarding school for 4 days. The sound of his father's voice, amplified by the basement's acoustics, was like a physical weight. Michael's hands froze on the keyboard. Then, another recording started. This one was Sarah, crying. "I didn't do it, Daddy. It was Michael. He was the one with the matches." The psychological warfare had begun. The ledger was using their own traumas against them, a house-wide lockdown protocol designed to destabilize any attempt at interference. The doors to the server room hissed shut, the magnetic locks engaging with a heavy clunk. Michael felt a surge of panic. He was trapped in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of his childhood. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on the lines of code on the screen. He had to finish the hack. He had to lower Sarah's score. But the system was fighting back. Every time he tried to enter the energy diversion data, a new recording would play, louder and more distorted than the last. The sound of his mother's cold, detached voice. The sound of his own childhood screams. The air in the basement grew thick with the smell of scorched insulation. He managed to push the final command through. Sarah's score flickered, dropping a fraction of a point. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Suddenly, The terminal screen went black. A single line of text appeared in the center, glowing in a sickly amber. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating countermeasures. The floor beneath Michael's feet began to vibrate. A high-pitched whine filled the air, the sound of the server rack's cooling fans spinning up to a lethal speed. Michael scrambled back from the terminal, his heart hammering. He needed to get out. He lunged for the door, but it wouldn't budge. He looked around the room, his eyes searching for an exit. There, in the corner, a small ventilation duct. It was a tight squeeze, but it was his only chance. He scrambled into the duct, the cold metal biting into his palms. He could hear the sound of the servers behind him, a roar like a jet engine. The air in the duct was stale and dusty, making him cough. He pushed himself forward, his muscles screaming with the effort. He emerged in the mansion's garage, a vast space filled with his father's collection of vintage cars. The air here was cooler, smelling of gasoline and leather. Michael collapsed on the concrete floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You're a hard man to track, Michael." He looked up to see a man standing by the garage door. It was Elias Vance, the private investigator Sarah had hired. He was a thin, wiry man, with a face like a hawk, holding a stun baton that crackled with blue electricity. "Give me the drive, Michael," Vance said, his voice a dry rustle. "Sarah wants it back." Michael stood up, his hand closing around a heavy wrench on a nearby workbench. "She doesn't know what's on it, Elias. If she gets this drive, she's dead." "She doesn't care about the why, Michael. She only cares about the what. And right now, what she wants is that drive." Vance lunged, the stun baton swinging in a wide arc. Michael dodged the blow, the electricity humming past his ear. He swung the wrench, catching Vance in the ribs. The man gasped, but he didn't go down. He was a professional, trained in the kind of violence Michael had only ever read about in data logs. They struggled in the dim light of the garage, the sound of their breathing and the crackle of the baton the only noises in the room. Michael felt a sharp pain in his shoulder as the baton grazed him, a jolt of electricity that made his muscles seize. He stumbled back, his vision blurring. He needed to get to his car. He lunged for his sleek black sedan, fumbling for the keys in his pocket. Vance was right behind him, the baton raised for another strike. Michael dived into the driver's seat, slamming the doors shut just as the baton hit the glass. He started the engine, the roar of the V8 filling the garage. He didn't bother with the remote for the bay door. He shifted into gear and slammed his foot on the accelerator. The car lunged forward, the sound of shattering wood and metal echoing through the garage as he crashed through the closed bay door. He didn't look back. He sped out of the estate grounds, the tires screeching against the asphalt. His utility score flashed on his phone's screen, dropping another 5 points for property damage and reckless endangerment. He was down to 9.2. He drove until he reached a secluded overlook, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance like a field of fallen stars. He stopped the car and pulled out the hardware drive. He needed to be sure. He needed to see the full extent of the nightmare. He decrypted the final sections of the liability clause. It was worse than he had imagined. OmniTrust, the shadowy conglomerate that had been backing Harrison's firm, wasn't just a partner. They were the architects of the entire system. The ledger wasn't just an inheritance tool. It was a recruitment process. They were looking for a winner who was ruthless enough to manage their criminal enterprises, a puppet CEO who would take all the risks while they reaped all the rewards. The winner would be tied to OmniTrust for life, their every move monitored and controlled by the same algorithm that was currently tearing Michael's family apart. Michael leaned his head against the steering wheel. The silence of the night pressing in on him. He realized then that he couldn't just win or lose the game. He had to destroy it. He looked at the city below. Tomorrow was the Met Gala. The elite of the world would be there. The people who funded OmniTrust, the people who benefited from the very systems he wanted to tear down. He would go to the gala. He would take the payload he had been building, a digital virus designed to broadcast the truth of the Sterling fraud and the OmniTrust conspiracy to every screen in the building. He would burn the house down, even if he was still inside it. But the system wasn't done with him yet. When Michael returned to his hotel suite to prepare for the gala, he found the air thick with a sweet, cloying scent. He frowned, his hand going to his stopwatch. He had been gone for 3 hours. He searched the room, his movements sharp and paranoid. He found it in his bedside drawer, a small, clear bag filled with white powder, high-grade narcotics. "Sarah," he whispered. His phone buzzed. A notification from the ledger. Moral turpitude penalty detected. Score adjustment. -5.0. He was down to 4.2. He was on the brink of disqualification. If he dropped to 0, the total liquidation protocol would be triggered, and he would be handed over to the authorities immediately. He didn't have time to clear his name. He didn't have time to find the exploit in the ledger's code. He had to move now. He spent the next 6 hours hunched over his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys as he coded the wipe virus. It was a desperate, beautiful piece of work. A digital wildfire that would consume every scrap of data the ledger had on him and Sarah. It was the only way to end the game. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a fortress of glass and marble, its vast halls filled with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of polite laughter. Michael moved through the crowd, his tuxedo a perfect mask for the rage and desperation boiling beneath his skin. He reached the Temple of Dender, the massive stone pylons casting long, jagged shadows across the glass enclosure. The sound of water lapping against the stone basin was a slow, rhythmic countdown. He saw her then. Sarah. She was standing by the sacrificial altar, her silver pen in hand, looking like a queen presiding over a crumbling empire. "You're late, Michael," she said, her voice echoing off the glass. "The tally is almost complete." "The tally doesn't matter, Sarah," Michael said, his hand moving to the portable terminal hidden in his jacket. "The game is over." "Oh, I don't think so," a new voice said. From the shadows behind the altar, a man stepped out. It was Thomas Wright, the estate executor. He was a man of immense physical bulk, his tuxedo straining against his muscles, his eyes cold and dead. He held a concealed weapon, the barrel glinting in the dim light. "The experiment requires a final physical confrontation," Wright said, his voice like grinding gravel. "Only the ultimate survivor will be crowned the winner." He looked at the siblings, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Your mother is watching, you know." Michael froze. "My mother?" The digital displays around the room suddenly flickered to life. Eleanor Sterling's face appeared on every screen, her expression as cold and detached as the day she had left them at boarding school. "Michael." "Sarah," she said, her voice amplified by the museum's sound system. "You've both played so well, but OmniTrust requires a single, definitive leader. The algorithm has determined that a final stress test is necessary." She looked at them, her eyes unblinking. "The world is watching. Show them what a Sterling is made of." The siblings looked at each other, the realization of their mother's betrayal hitting them like a physical blow. They weren't just data points to her. They were entertainment. Their life or death struggle was being live-streamed to the global elite. A high-stakes show for the people who truly ran the world. "I'm not doing this," Michael said, his hand moving to execute the wipe virus. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Michael," Eleanor said. The screen on Michael's terminal flashed red. Virus detected. Quarantine initiated. Deletion complete. Michael felt a surge of despair. His last hope, his final weapon, had been neutralized before it could even fire. "Michael Sterling," Eleanor's voice boomed through the hall. "You are officially a social liability. Your score has reached 0. The security guards moved in, their boots thudding against the stone floor. Michael looked at Sarah, expecting to see triumph in her eyes. But he saw only fear. She realized then, as he had, that being the winner wasn't a victory. It was a sentence. Subverted beat 4.1. The security guards closed in, their faces hidden behind dark visors, their movements synchronized and lethal. One of them grabbed Michael's arm, the grip like a vise of cold iron. He felt his shoulder pop, a sharp burst of pain that made his vision swim. He looked toward Sarah, expecting her to finally seize the moment, to step onto the altar and claim the hollow throne their father had left behind. Instead, Sarah lunged toward the nearest digital display. Her face was a mask of frantic desperation, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at the glass as if she could tear her own score out of the air. "I'm the winner. Look at the numbers. I did everything you asked," she shrieked, her voice cracking. In response, the screen shifted. Sarah's private medical records, the ones she had spent a fortune to keep buried, scrolled past in a blur of clinical text. Her history of panic attacks, her secret hospitalizations, the weakness she had spent her life trying to hide. The crowd of elite guests gasped, a collective sound like a cold wind through the hall. Sarah collapsed to her knees, her binder of apologies spilling across the stone floor like white petals. She looked small, broken, and utterly alone. Michael watched her, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was his chance. If he turned on her now, if he joined the crowd in their mockery, the algorithm might see it as a strategic alignment with the majority. He might be able to claw back enough points to avoid immediate arrest. It was the smart move, the logical move, the Sterling move. He stepped toward her, his hand reaching out. The guards hesitated, their programming perhaps waiting for the final blow. Michael looked down at his sister, the woman who had spent her life trying to destroy him. He didn't hit her. He didn't mock her. He knelt on the cold stone and gently took her hand. He helped her up, his movements slow and deliberate. "It's okay, Sarah," he whispered, his voice the only steady thing in the room. "The numbers don't matter." For a heart-stopping second, the museum fell into a profound silence. Michael felt a strange sense of peace wash over him, a relief he hadn't known since he was a child. He had finally made a choice that wasn't dictated by a system. But then, the air in the Temple of Dender began to hum. The amber light on the screens turned a violent, pulsing purple. A siren began to wail, a high-pitched sound that vibrated in Michael's teeth. Logic error detected. Mutual compromise detected. Initiating conflict resolution override. The truth hit Michael like a physical blow. His act of altruism hadn't broken the system. It had triggered its final, most lethal defense. The ledger wasn't programmed to handle cooperation. It saw mutual compromise as a systemic failure, a conflict resolution error that could only be fixed by total liquidation of both data points. By helping Sarah, Michael hadn't saved her. He had ensured that they would both be destroyed. The floor beneath them began to shift, the stone slab sliding away to reveal a dark, yawning abyss. The total liquidation protocol wasn't a legal term. It was a physical one. The museum's hidden mechanisms, designed to protect the artifacts from fire or theft, were now being turned on them. "Michael!" Sarah screamed, clinging to his arm. The air grew hot, the smell of ozone and burning plastic filling the enclosure. The server racks behind the altar began to spark, the algorithm overheating as it tried to process the impossible data of their cooperation. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the lights went out. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the rhythmic lap of water against the stone basin. Michael and Sarah stood together in the darkness, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The system was dead. They emerged from the museum into the cool night air of Manhattan. Two ghosts in tattered evening wear. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The world they had known was gone, replaced by a cold, indifferent reality. Weeks later, they met in a derelict diner in New Jersey, a place where the neon sign flickered over empty booths and the air smelled of burnt coffee and old grease. They sat in a corner booth, the vinyl seats cracked and cold. Michael looked at Sarah. She was wearing a simple wool coat, her hair unstyled, her face free of the mask she had worn for so long. She looked older, but she also looked real. "I saw him today," Michael said, his voice raspy. "In the hospital. Harrison had recovered from his stroke, but he was a shell of the man he had been. He had admitted everything, the fraud, the debts, the lie of the sterling billions. He had faked his deathbed to find a scapegoat, a child ruthless enough to take the fall so he could disappear with whatever scraps of wealth he had left. He never loved us, did he?" Sarah asked, her voice a soft, tired sigh. "He loved the legacy," Michael said. "He just forgot that we were the ones who had to live it." They shared a single cup of coffee, the last of their coins spread out on the table between them. Michael looked at his sister, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a rival. He didn't see a data point. He saw a human being. He reached out and clicked his stopwatch one last time. He let it run for a few seconds, then pressed the button to stop it. He took the watch from around his neck and laid it on the table. "The time is 4:12 a.m., he said, his voice steady. "And for the first time in 32 years, I'm not counting the seconds." Sarah looked at the watch, then at him. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "It's about time, Michael," she said. They sat in the silence of the diner. Two broken people in a broken world, finally free of the numbers, realizing they had destroyed their lives for a hollow treasure. But finding, in the wreckage, the only thing that had ever truly mattered. They were siblings. And they were alive.